Previously, on Fifth Avenue's Courageous Conversations, we asked questions about our individual experiences around race and racism. This time, we take time to process some of our church's history, as our archivist has discovered that many of our founding members, including founding pastor Reverend John Romeyn, were indeed slaveholders. This is Fifth Avenue's Courageous Conversations.
I'm Dale Hansen. I joined the church in 1995, and my primary activity at the moment is working in the church archives, where I've actually worked since 1998. Discovering this was quite interesting. Tim Palmer, then the director of communications, looked at a newly released database produced by John Jay College a few years ago and typed in John Romeyn's name, and up popped Elizabeth Jackson as his slave. Now, I'd known that Elizabeth Jackson was a member of our church. She was actually a charter member of our church, one of 28. I'd known that Betsy and Dr. Romeyn had been in the Albany area at the time that Dr. Romeyn was senior pastor of First Presbyterian Church of Albany. And I knew that the two of them moved to the New York City on or about the same time. But I never put two and two together to consider that Betsy might have been a slave, much less a slave in Dr. Romeyn's household. So my first emotion, I think, was one of shock, but very quickly I think it turned to shame, because I had known these facts and I'd never associated the facts and put two and two together and realized that our senior pastor, our first senior pastor, had been a slaveholder. It really brought it close to home. Personally, because Fifth Avenue Presbyterian Church and its predecessor church, Cedar Street, which Romeyn was the pastor of at that time, that's our home. We call Fifth Avenue our home. And so recognizing that there was a history of slavery in this church in its earliest years was actually now something that was part of my past as well, because I'm so involved with this church. You know, back in the Civil War, certainly a hot period with respect to the topic of slavery, our senior pastor at the time, Nathan Rice, was very, very apolitical. It seems to me, from what I've read, it was almost so silent on the topic that it was almost uncomfortable. I think they expected to hear something on such a meaningful topic at the time. It might not have been what they wanted to hear, but they were hearing nothing. And that silence is almost louder than the words that could be spoken. I think it's important to recognize that the church is not perfect. We can be very proud of our involvement in our over 200-year history of our outreach to the city, to the downtrodden, outreach throughout the city, state, country, and world. But we do have some dark spots because we're human. Church is somewhat human in that regard. We've made some mistakes. Let's learn from those mistakes. Let's move forward, learning from those mistakes. How do you do that with respect to slavery? Well, we're certainly not going to be slaveholders in the future. but we should be working to eliminate racism in our thoughts, in our actions, in our behavior, and really try to live as best we can our motto, so to speak, of all are welcome. I think it's a question of understanding what racism is, what words ring racist to those who hear them. There's so many things that we probably say because we've said for so many years and never been conscious of what they meant to the person hearing them. So understanding how our words are received by those who properly could accuse us of being racist is important. Not only the fact that they consider those racist, but why do they consider it racist? It's hard to sometimes understand why something we might consider offhand is really hurtful to the other person. And so we really need to understand that, the basis for the hurt, because otherwise it won't sink in enough for us to eliminate it in our day-to-day speech. But of course, speech is impacted by thought, and we have to understand much more so than many of us already do in order to change our thinking pattern. What the church does in the future, getting us to understand what racism is all about, because if we don't understand what it is, we can't eliminate it, or we'll choose not to eliminate it. It's easy to move along. So we need to be put in some difficult, uncomfortable situations, because uncomfortable situations will stick with us. We will forget the pleasant things very quickly. And that's important, because our thinking process does take time. Maybe as a younger person, I could change my thinking process from day to day much more quickly. But as I've gone through a few decades of living, my thinking has probably tended to get a little bit firmer in some regard, left, right, or center, whatever. But I've also seen my thinking process start to evolve and start to change in recent years. And the influence of the church, the influence of groups around me, be they younger people, oftentimes that's the case, my daughters, my wife, just people around me. The more exposure we have to people who think differently, helps us to form different opinions, and hopefully those are we're forming correct opinions, more just opinions. So that's, the church can't turn racism around on a dime, but it needs to be credited with trying, and try hard enough and it will succeed. I'm confident in that. I have faith in this church. I have faith in the pastors. I have faith in the congregants.